Good afternoon, everyone, dear CGCC members and friends. Welcome to the Path Forward series. Do what Romans do, optimize localization strategies. My name is Ling Yi, and I am the Executive Director at the China General Chamber of Commerce, Houston. At CGCC, our mission is to create value, generate economic growth, and enhance cooperation between the U.S. and the Chinese business communities. CGCC offers a broad range of programs, services, and resources to over 1,000 multinational members across the U.S. At today's event, you will learn the key findings of the 2022 Annual Business Survey on Chinese enterprises operating in the United States. We are also honored to be joined by a group of prominent experts that will share their unique insights and experience during the panel discussion. Now, please join me in welcoming the chairman of CGCC Houston, president of PetroChina International American Inc., Mr. Tang Qidi, giving us the opening remarks today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ling Yi. Distinguished guests, friends, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Houston. Thank you for joining us today. My name is T.D. Tang. I'm from PetroChina International, and I'm the chairman for CGCC Houston. It's my honor here to give the opening remarks today. As everyone knows, 2021 was a year with many challenges. Most of us has facing dual challenges posed by both the escalating compliance program and the volatile market. As the bilateral relationship remain complex and competitive, forcing our Chinese companies to adapt to the new norm. Here at CGCC Houston, we strive to create opportunities, build deep and constructive relationship within our community across the U.S. family. I firmly believe that this event will give the public a unique and accurate view into the optimized and relents that commonly define the business cooperation between our two countries. It's our hope that we can weather this storm together and seek compromise, promote mutual respect, and build a bright future as we claim our way out of this tragic pandemic and economic challenges. Thanks to CGCC to organize the first Houston in-person event and share key findings from the latest annual business survey. Next, I would like to welcome and express our deepest appreciation to Mr. Hu, the chairman of CGCC, who has provided us tremendous support while organizing today's event. Would also like to thank Mr. Zhang Shao, Mr. Guan Linghua, Mr. Emily, and Mr. John Scanipolico. Thank you for taking this time from your busy schedule and making great efforts to attend the Pace Forward series panel in Houston today. Now, let us welcome Mr. Hu to give us the remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Mrs. Tang for your kind introduction. And thanks all the friends and especially our CGCC members for joining me. I know some of you are not based in Houston, so thank you again for flying to Houston directly for this event. For today, actually, we believe actually for this event, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to our CGCC Houston colleagues for the enthusiasm and support in putting this event together. And I'm expecting for our speakers for your invaluable experiences and insights, and also to all the guests for your contribution and participation in this dynamic discussion. So actually, for today's topic, actually that's the optimized localization strategy. That's a quite interesting topic, I would say, especially given the current geopolitical situations. Um, Before I go to that detail, maybe we have to put the topic actually in a greater picture. That is actually how the Chinese investment done in the past several years or more than 40 years actually in the US. Actually, that's our greater picture. So as we all know, since the China open reform and opening up in the uh, 1980s, actually more and more Chinese investments come to the States. And actually, it's really exceptionally important for everyone to understand how the Chinese investment in the US represent an integral and beneficial part of the overall business strategy or business relationship. All the Chinese, or most of the Chinese companies, they reinvest their earnings in the US market, and they make full use of the US service sector. They purchase American products, and they increase their export to China and support the local communities, whether that's tax or benefit or grant or employment. According to our statistics, as of March this year, our Chinese member companies have cumulatively invested over $135 billion in the States, directly employed more than 220,000 employees, and indirectly supporting more than 1 million US jobs. So that's really a huge contribution from our Chinese investments to the US community. We understand actually the geopolitics and the microeconomic environment grow more and more complex, and there are kind of more volatility, more uncertainty during the coming sessions, and all the business have started to pay more attention to better tap to the local market. So that's why we believe actually the theme of the localization strategy is quite important. When we say the globalization is still there, maybe it will take a different trend or different dynamic. So we do believe actually to optimize the local strategy will be a quite important area when you think about competing globally. So with growth and expansion comes the important steps of localizing companies' products, service, website content, and more. For most of the companies, entering a new market pose a major financial challenges, demanding significant investment in localization, as well as payment and supply chain management, among other things. So although today's advanced and accessible technologies make it possible to launch in new markets in a quite short period of time, and a fraction of the cost and hassle, companies with an eye for cross-border expansion will still be conservative and sometimes struggling as to which and how many markets they targeted. With our programs and events, we would like to help our companies, especially Chinese investors, to consider your regional strategies as a reasonable compromise between the one-size-fits-all global strategy and an inefficient and costly, highly localized strategy. We do believe there is a balance between the two parts. As we look into the future, there is a clearly great potential in many areas for business localization strategies and implementation for Chinese companies. In our nice consecutive annual business survey report on China enterprises in the US, we are glad to observe that actually our members, especially for the Chinese companies, we have performed, our performance is stabilizing and slowly recovering from the disruptions of the pandemic. The level of satisfaction with the US investment and business environment also rebound to some extent. So beyond capital and production investment, Chinese companies are seeking to strengthen the long-term competitiveness in the US market through effective compliance, stronger brand recognition, green transition, and streamlined operations. So during these unprecedented times, it takes stronger alliances and close cooperation among our organizations to help US and Chinese business better understand, engage with, and contribute to some of the most critical issues and deal makings. At CGCC, we strive to continue cultivating ties of friendship, creating platform for candid communication, and opening windows for mutually beneficial cooperation between the US and China business communities. So with that, I wish the 2022 Pass Forward in Houston a great success, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teng. Thank you, Chairman Hu. Now, I'd like to invite A.B. Lee, the Director of Corporate Communication of CGCC, to present the key finds from the 2022 CGCC Business Survey Report. Please give a warm welcome to A.B. Thank you.
Thank you, Lingyi. Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming to our event. My name is Abby, and I'm from China General Chamber of Commerce, and I'm very glad and honored to present you our updated findings of our 2022 Annual Business Survey. There are several topics I'd like to cover and walk you through today, so you will have a brief understanding of the project itself and some of the key trends that I identified in the survey report. So as one of the most comprehensive research projects focusing on existing Chinese business in the US, our survey helps to timely reflect the business development and the issues companies have encountered in the past year. Well, at the same time, the report also helps the US side of the market to better understand the operational status of Chinese companies and their contributions to an positive impact on the US economy and their local communities. So as Chairman Hu has mentioned, we have been doing this research since 2014. So this is our 9th consecutive survey report. So this year, we gathered 111 Chinese companies, their data, first-hand data. Our respondents' US operations are established in 42 states, and their subsidiary offices and other facilities are located across the country. Well, the top 5 states that host our respondent companies are California, New York, here in Texas, New Jersey, and Illinois. Our company's US operations actually span all the 11 sectors according to the Global Industry Classification Standard. Well, another 2 helpful indicators to help us better understand the demographics are the ownership structure of their parent companies, as well as the corporate structure through which they establish the US operations. As we can see here, most of the almost half of the respondents are private companies, and only 19% of the companies are government owned. And also, most of our respondents, actually, next place, 63% of our companies entered the US market via greenfield investments, which means they establish a new business entity instead of acquiring an existing one. So overall, as we have been seeing over the past 30 months, the data results actually reflect a mixed picture of how Chinese companies have been doing in the US for the last year. So on the positive side, we observed that a slight recovered performances of Chinese companies. And we believe it was supported by business resilience and their commitment to the business growth as their primary objective. Well, on the other hand, companies are also complaining or claiming that the pressures and challenges are also mounting due to a complex and increasingly contested environment in the US last year. So the recovery we mentioned, the slight recovery was first reflected in their revenue and profitability. As we can see here, 54% of respondent companies reported an increase in revenue last year. And that number was only 20% from our prior year's survey. So it's clearly has bounced back to a pre-pandemic level and even close to our results in 2017 and 2018. Along with the revenue, company's EBIT margin, which indicates their profitability level, was also slightly restored to the 2020 level. You can see 44% of the companies have reported increased EBIT margin. And from the new investment perspective, thank you. It's worth noticing that 24% of respondents made new investments in the US last year. And that number actually doubled our results from our 2021 survey. And the majority, when we did delve into the details, we noticed that the majority of new investments were made in the energy, IT, and financial sectors, indicating the market is expanding in those industries clearly. All the results also aligned with the trend that Chinese companies tend to invest heavily in digital transformation, especially during the pandemic years. And our data and our interviews with companies executives also indicate that Chinese companies remain committed to the U.S. market over the long run. In fact, we observed a clear bouncing back in terms of assessment of the U.S. business and investment environment by respondent companies this year. If we look at those little hearts, actually, we have 29% of respondent companies claim that a moderate or substantial improvements of the local business climate in the US. And that number was only 6% from last year. So it's an obvious increase. Well, that's the positive part of the story. And when the other part of the mixed picture we mentioned comes from the complicated state of the US-China relations, or the instability of the US as well as the global economy itself. So the uncertainties posed great challenges to our Chinese companies in almost every aspect of their business operation. Like they need to deal with the inflation effects, and it's generally more difficult to hire and maintain high quality workforce. And there is also a high cost of compliance programs and so on. So it triggered overwhelming challenges and difficulties for Chinese companies. So one trend I think it's worth noticing is that when the companies, Chinese headquarters or their parent companies, if we look at that number, their commitment to the US market in the short run seems to be a little wavering or shaking according to our data this year. We can see only 74% of our respondents reported that they have reinvested the majority of their US profits back into their local business this year. And that number was 90% in 2020 and 80% in 2019. And similarly, when we look at the company's US business revenue contributions to their parent companies, 71% companies counted less than 10% of their parent company's global revenue. That means like more companies, US contributions are contributing less to their parent companies globally. Then that number was only 50. Please go back. Yeah, go back a little bit. That number was only 58% in 2020 and 64% in 2019. So 71%, that was actually the highest number since 2018. Yeah. So, and also our Chinese companies' expectations for the US-China relationship in the near future is not getting better. As we can see here, nearly half of the surveyed companies forecast a worse US-China bilateral relations than the year prior. and only 10% of them expected improvements actually. So, which was about only 1/4 of the number in 2021 results. Similar situations for the trade and economic relations as well, we can see at the bottom. So looking at the mixed picture, it's not difficult to identify the cautious optimism of Chinese companies here. While looking forward, there's a slight larger number of companies compared to the year prior expect higher revenues over the next 2 years. Or in terms of future investments, 27% of them are investing more in the coming year, while that number was only 12% from our last year's survey results. So over the long run, we can see that Chinese companies are strategically committed to the US market. While it's obviously a lot of challenges and difficulties going on, but it's still the preliminary trend here. Okay. So as mentioned earlier, with expanding challenges and risks over the past years, Chinese companies' compliance with the US laws and regulations start to catch attention of managers and policymakers in both countries, actually. So in our 2022 business survey, we took a closer look at the legal and compliance aspect of Chinese companies or operations here in the US. So when asking about the challenges companies face in complying with US laws and regulations, and surprisingly, complex and ambiguous US laws and regulations top the list. So as noted, the expanding regulation has been a key driving force of the US corporate compliance movement since the early 1990s, right? Actually, a lot of the standards are quite vague instead of clear-cutting rules. So even for sizable US companies with highly sophisticated compliance staff cannot easily guarantee 100% compliance. So much less for Chinese companies that has entered the US market for only a few decades and is still testing the water. So moreover, half of the surveyed respondents consider potential conflicts between US and Chinese regulations and laws to be a major challenge. So in the past few years, like the deteriorating relations between our countries and the rapidly shifting geopolitical orders also posed a lot of challenges for this. And both adopting expanding sanctions and corresponding blocking regulations. So those are the two main challenges when companies doing compliance and legal and compliance in the US. And the others include the lack of awareness of the cost of non-compliance, the lack of communication with US local regulators, and difficulty to control the risks relating to a third party. That's also a big part of the challenge. Well, since we don't have too much time to go to the details of the legal and compliance part, but we do have covered all those topics in our report. So feel free to refer to the hard copies on your table or read the digital version of our report on our website. Well, another featured topic of our 2022 survey report is brand and trust, which also speaks to our event theme today, localization. Well, as Chinese companies have been entering and competing in the US market for the last 2 decades, they have constantly adapting to the local market and evolving upward towards the industry value chain. And nowadays, many Chinese companies are striving to go to the front row to trying to directly communicate with their clients and audience here in the local market, trying to better understand them and even trying to influence their perceptions and demands. So that's why we have been witnessing the trend that the companies have heavily investing in the brand and the trust, which is arguably the most valuable intangible asset of a company. So this year's survey was designed to understand some of the critical aspects of Chinese companies' journey of managing their brand image and elevating their image in the US market. When being asked to evaluate their current brand presence in the US, 29% of the responding companies feel that they currently have a either moderately or extremely weak brand presence. And 31% of them actually feel neutral. And only 7% of them feel very confident about their US brand presence. Yeah, and clearly there's much work to do and great potential for us to improve. So the data clearly echoes the challenging business environment that Chinese companies have been facing in the US for the past years. And considering the foreign nature of companies, our Chinese companies, it's especially important for business leaders and entrepreneurs to actively motivated to boost their brand and trust while trying to enter or expand in the US market. We also trying to understand the objectives of the companies to establish or maintain their US brand presence. And those are the top reasons or objectives for them to form an integral part of their company's global strategy, and to expand the customer base for profitability, to develop a relationship with key suppliers, partners, and investors as a crucial part of their supply chain management. Also to build reputation as a global brand, and to build brand trust in the US. So those are some of the prevailing objectives here. We also want to learn the main challenges of our Chinese companies doing brand and marketing here in the US. And from our interactions and communications with our member companies, we feel that they sometimes are quite hesitant or confused about their approaches in terms of branding and trust. So especially from what angles to break into those practices, that's the most challenging part. So the main challenge obviously is the low trust of Chinese brand, like overall low trust of Chinese brands by customers in the US market, especially during the pandemic years and the Trump administration. And also prevailing anti-China sentiments in the US public discourse and the media. I'm sure a lot of us can feel that in the past few years. Also the cultural differences and lack of understanding of professional brand building practices in the US, since there are a lot of differences between the Chinese way and the US way to do that. And also the potential conflicts between US market needs and the headquarters brand and marketing guidance. That's also a big part of the challenge. Thank you. So we asked companies whether they feel that engaging in social issues would be beneficial to earning trust with their stakeholders and the market in general. So majority of them say yes, they definitely have a lot of issues they want to engage in and take actions on. So those are the most those are the topics that they think are most important. The climate change top the list. And then comes the workforce, rescaling, technology and automation, economic and adequate inequality, and so on. So obviously, like corporate social responsibility remains to be one of the major tasks for companies to do in the US market. Okay. So the US is, needless to say, one of the most strategically important market for companies' globalization. And and our survey results show that the hesitation we just talked about of Chinese companies in establishing and maintaining a strong US brand is only temporary. So as the time horizon goes from the current to short term and to long term, most of the companies will take up and focus on the importance of corporate branding to their US business strategy along the spectrum. So there is a lot of potentials there, and companies are definitely keep investing in brand and trust and from the short term to the long term as well. Okay, so as US and Chinese companies still hold deep commercial interest in each other's market, we CGCC remains committed to not only carrying out more constructive communication and engagement between those two, but also want to building bridges and achieving greater synergies to encourage better understanding and cooperation between the world's two largest economies. So that's basically the key trends of our 2022 survey report. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Mhm.
Thank you, AB, for such an informative presentation. Now, based on these key findings, it's time for our panel discussion. Optimize localization strategies and best practice. It's my honor to invite up all of our speakers today. Mr. Guan Linghua, Mr. Xiao Zhang, Ms. Xiao Zhang, Ms. Amy Lei, and Mr. John Scapinoco. Welcome. And also our host today is AB, the Director of CDCC for Communication and Research.
Thank you. Well, after all those numbers and data trends, I'm sure you don't want to listen to me anymore, but I'm glad we have convened a wonderful panel today with gathering industry experts and our experts from service sides to talk about localization, optimize the localization strategies for Chinese companies. So let me introduce you to Mr. Guan Linghua, CEO of Surge Energy America. Ms. Shao Zhang is the partner and America's leader of China investment in the U.S. in Ernst & Young, and with extensive experience working with Chinese companies and help them optimize their business operations here. And we also have Amy Lei. Amy is Vice President of Fuyao Glass America. I'm sure you will all very familiar with Fuyao, so it's the superstar here. And then last but not least, we have John Scanapiaco, right? He's the partner of Wombo Bond Dickinson. It's a local transatlantic law firm offering like legal advice to their global clients. So I welcome you all, and please take a few minutes to briefly introduce yourself with the company you represent, and anything you want to share at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, I was Linhua Guan. I'm working for Surge Energy. So for the people we haven't met before, Surge Energy was established in 2015 by two private equity from China. And 2 years later, 2017, the company merged with Xinchao Energy, that is a Shanghai Stock Exchange listed company in China. Right now, we are still a private company here, headquartered in Houston, but the company has a $1.75 billion revolver, and we issued a $1.2 billion bond. So we have quarterly conference calls with the bank, Wall Street banks, with the bondholders, and also the rating agency. So that is a short summary about the surge energy.
大家好啊，下午好哈，我还是决定用中文先讲两句，因为特别是下午哈，wake everybody up。我叫张小青，是美国安永事务所的合伙人在美国已经30年，在安永25年，然后呢一直服务中资企业，从2012年正式100% serve Chinese company， 非常有幸。特别高兴能够跟大家在一起，都是老朋友、新朋友，非常熟悉的脸孔哈。初衷就是一个能够在美国帮到大家。我们安永的这个团队在这么多年见证了这个整个所有的中资企业这边成长的过程，也看见大家 up and down，但是呢，我们也从中也是跟大家一块成长。从当年0 revenue 到现在150 million US dollars，1.5个亿，大家也可以看见整个中资企业在美国就通过我们的业务成长，它的这个规模非常感谢。So thank you so much for everybody, and I saw that there's a 90%, more than 99% of people are here are Chinese, so speak Mandarin, and I try to speak both. All right, thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
OK， 谢谢小青总，这个我也简单的先用中文讲两句吧。这个我叫 Amy 雷，然后这个是福耀的对外关系的副总非常高兴这边很多老朋友在这边，然后也很高兴见到新朋友。那接下来我主要还是因为有几个美国客人，就简单一点，时间有限，用英文讲几句这样子。So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Lei, Vice President of Fuyao Glass America. So I'm in charge of the external affairs and public relations. It's very great pleasure to be here today. I see many old friends and very happy to meet some new friends here as well. I think many of you, are familiar with Fuyao Glass. For those of you who don't know Fuyao, Fuyao is the largest auto glass supplier in the world. So globally, we have about 27,000 employees in 11 different countries. Here in the US, we have about 3,000 employees in 4 different states. They are at Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, and South Carolina. So talking about our customers, actually, I believe majority of you guys are the end users of our products because we supply a lot of tier 1 automotive companies, including General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, all the major US brands, all the major German brands, you name it, right? Audi, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Bentley, if you are driving, many of the boss here drive luxury cars. And also, the electric vehicle companies, the famous name Tesla and many others. The list can go on. So I know many of you are end users. If you go back today, take a look at the sticker of your car, right? Many of it probably will say the Fuyao logo in the windshield, in the side glass. So, very happy to be here. It's the largest one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is John Scanapiego. I'm with Womble Bond Dickinson. I'm a partner. I have been working with Chinese companies in China since 1998, 1997. I don't know, it's been so long that I guess I'm so old now. I can't remember exactly, but our law firm is about 1,200 lawyers based here in the United States and in the United Kingdom. We have 23 offices here in the United States, including in New York City, Boston, Washington, D.C., Charlotte, Research Triangle Park, Atlanta, Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Silicon Valley, to name a few. I think from a law firm perspective, it may relate to the folks here in this crowd. We have one of the leading intellectual property law firms in the United States. We work on trade and investment matters, have a large trade regulatory practice, so CFIUS. export controls, U.S. economic sanctions, all, I think some of the issues that were in your report, that's what we seem to focus on. One of our two of our colleagues are here somewhere. I think I see them focusing on ITC Section 337 investigations, as well as trade and investment issues here. So thank you again for having us, and we look forward to participating in the
Thank
dialogue.
you. Thank you all. So let's delve into our topic today. Actually, my first question goes to all of you. So we have been reviewed some of the macro environment and also some trends that are reflected by our Chinese companies representatives. So for Mr. Guan and Amy, who has been leading very successful Chinese companies here. So how would you evaluate the overall performance of your company or the industry over the past 2 years? And for Sean and John, experts from the professional service sector, what were your observations on this? And have you been seeing a lot of Chinese companies coming to the US lately? Yeah, so those questions for you all, whoever wants to go first.
Okay, the pressures are all here there. So, well, thank you for the question. This is certainly a great question. The reason being, right, in the past 2 years, we are seeing a lot of, complicated dynamics around the globe, right? You think about it, right? The unexpected COVID-19, the unexpected Russia war, which is a great disruption. We are also seeing right here in the US, right? The skyrocket inflation rate, 10%. I never heard about it since I'm here in the US, right? And we are also seeing interest rate extremely high, which will affect, the overall business expansion and a lot of the industries. So I think I'm definitely saying, a lot of companies, unfortunately, and a lot of industries, unfortunately, are heavily impacted by this complicated dynamics. However, Fuyao, we have been very nimble. We have tried to react very quickly to try to minimize the impact of all those complicated factors. So overall, for the past 2 years and the past few years, while we are in the US, right, Fuyao has been doing well. We are growing steadily and quickly. So we are able to grow and maintain the leadership positions. And since 2020, we are actually become the #1 in this industry in the US and globally. So I think, we are seeing a lot of different things happening, but overall, we are doing very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah.
Yeah, in the past 3 years, especially since pandemic, that was unprecedented for the oil and gas industry. Probably remember year 2020, pretty much the whole world shut down. And in April 2020, the crude oil price, even went down to almost $40. And that was the first time in the petroleum industry that crude oil price went to negative. And in February 2021, it's quite interesting. The winter storm Uri, the temperature here in Texas was lower than temperature in Alaska. So for the whole oil and gas industry, many companies filed bankruptcy. Probably from year 2020, about 200 companies filed bankruptcy. But unluckily that Surge Energy, we survived the downturn and even took advantage of the downturn. We closed 2 acquisitions in year 2021. And just a little bit later this month, we are going to celebrate $7 billion oil and gas sales. Because of the $7 billion sales, we paid $2 billion royalty and the state and local tax. We contribute to job creation for the state of Texas, and also we contribute $7 billion in the past few years. When the company started in 2015, just a few person and a few thousand barrel production. We are going to release our third quarter quarterly result next week. But based on our second quarter quarterly result, we already in the short 7 years, we grow our production more than 10 times and contribute $7 billion to the economy of Texas.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I think there's always challenge, and I think over the last 2 years, the challenges is getting worse and worse, and but we have to face that challenge, right? Everybody understand this tension between U.S. and China, and if we put our companies group into two, one is a state-owned company and that is a private-owned company. So the list also sanction list getting longer and longer. So from our observation is state-owned companies really starting getting slowed down everything, right? So this is a reality we have to facing. And then I think a private-owned company and also facing great challenges. And basically I was saying dancing around between two governments. It's really putting a very bad situation right now. But I think on the positive side, I think on the new energy sector, I think it's both countries really encourage the new energy sector to really move to, for example, for the autos, for the EV company. And I think it attract tons of Chinese inbound EV companies coming to the US. And I think that's not just all the components, the entire supply chain, entire industry wanted to come to US, but however, still facing a lot of challenges, for example, funding, right? And where the investment coming from, whether it's encouraged by the, still remain to see encouraged by the two governments. And the US side is really put a lot of incentives into the put on the market. It's like 7 billion into 7 billion here, 10 billion there. And it's really wanted to bring the entire supply chain back to the US. But however, whether or not a Chinese company, including a private-owned company, able to get that incentive, that could be up to, for example, the battery company and or battery-related company, EV battery-related company, they can get a DOE loan, most recently, DOE grant actually, up to 25%. And however, this November 1st just announced the results, and I think now the Chinese company get any. So that's the things I'm sure from top, and I think the leadership from both countries really should talk how we're moving this forward. But otherwise, everything's still good, sunshine every day, and we just have to be patient. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shaw. Yeah.
I agree that it's becoming a very challenging environment, but you know, my father was a serial entrepreneur, so it was always about how do we get to yes. And so that is the motto of our global business team is how can we help you get to yes? And so we work very hard in terms of whether it's dealing with, say, the increased regulatory compliance issues or CFIUS issues, or even on the loan issues and incentives in different states. I totally agree, but I believe there is opportunity in the industry, whether it's in renewables, the EV space. There's a lot of, we're busier now than we were. We're back to probably pre-pandemic busy, but it's a different kind of busy. So I'm not buying necessarily companies anymore. Now we're doing more greenfield or brownfield foreign direct investment projects, or we are expanding existing business here, or helping companies look at, especially with our global footprint. So looking at China, for example, Asia, the US and Latin America. So taking advantage of, say, free trade agreements and different trade agreements that, say, China may have or other countries may have, and going into Mexico and then taking advantage, say, of USMCA or some of these other trade deals to then enter the United States. So we're seeing still a lot of business. It's just a different type of business. And I agree. I mean, I think this goes both ways, US to China, China to the US. But my motto is always, look, governments come and go, policies come and go, but business, like all of us in this room, we will always be here because we always have been here. And we will always find a way. I mean, the last number I saw was what, 660 billion in trade and investment between us, the two countries, and you just can't turn that off. I just feel like today we will always find a way around some of these regulations so that we can continue to do business no matter how challenging it may become. But I agree with you. I hope that our governments will speak and figure out a way that we can maybe be healthy competitors, and continue on.
Yeah, just add one thing, as Abby mentioned, right? So I think US always remained the largest, one of the most important market. Doesn't matter how the political tension is, business is a business. Business has to move on. So we will figure it out. And John and I, like law firm and accounting firm, and has to figure it out, to help everybody out. Thank you.
Maybe I can add a few things to echo what Xiao and John said. So many of you probably know, prior to joining Fuyao, I actually worked for Jobs Ohio. I was the head of Asian business development for Jobs Ohio, which is a state-owned, which is not a state-owned, sorry, which is a statewide economic development organization for the state of Ohio to attract investment and projects, business to Ohio. So I was very honored to be part of the winning team for many of the billion-dollar mega projects, including the well-known Intel deal, including the recent announced, Honda deal, the LG Energy Solution, and of course, the Fuyao project. That's actually how I got to know Fuyao and the chairman. But to answer the second part of your question, right, are we seeing a lot of potential interest from China to the US? The answer is yes. I heard a lot of potential interest as well. That's exactly what Xiao just said, right? Many of the companies, especially when they're thinking about coming to the US, especially for the first time, they probably really need a lot of professional help to get the help from companies like EY and like the law firm to make sure their market entry strategy is right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we all agree that business is business, well said. And although challenges and then difficulties remain, we still see a lot of like the potentials and positive things going on in the business world. And that actually aligned with our survey results that sectors like energy, IT, finance, and EV that you mentioned are very active, even manufacturing. So we have great examples right on our panel. So, but still we need to delve into the detailed texture of how to better performance in the market. So that brings my question to Mr. Guan. There's like a frequent expectation in the oil and gas industry that companies in that should like better communicate with the market and their client on how they do their sustainability efforts, like how to balance the steady growth and transparent, well, how to improve their environmental footprint. So what's your experience and what do you think it's very important to Surge Energy? What have you been dealing with those issues?
Yeah, generally speaking, the oil and gas industry was not good at telling its story to the outside world. So when the company started in 2015, there's a hired the local employee here, and we publish also our own sustainability report since 2020 and 2021. But this year, I decided to make our third annual sustainability report, our first public report, just telling our story to the outside world. So since the company Surge Energy started, we put sustainability in the center of everything we do. And we consider in the one area on the produced water recycling part, we are pioneer in the US company, and we are leader in the electrification of our operations. Give some numbers on the why we are pioneer in the produced water recycling business. When the company started 2015, and we started build our first kind of water recycling business since 2017. And so far, we already conserved 3.6 billion gallons of fresh water in the dry area of West Texas. How big? About 3.6 billion gallons of fresh water. That is enough to give everyone in this room and every American in this country 10 gallons of fresh water. And because of the water infrastructure that we build, we eliminate more than 2 million trucks off the road of West Texas. And because of that, we remove more than 2 million trucks of that big water trucks. That reduced CO2 emission of about 55,000 metric tons of CO2 emission, and also make the West Texas, the road, much safer. At the same time, I mentioned about on the electrification part, because oil field operation is in the West Texas, we need a lot of electricity. So we built our first substation in January 2020, and that alone removed, in that year, yearly 2020, we removed 45 diesel fire generators. And that alone, in each year, that substation will remove 150,000 metric tons of CO2 yearly. And because of the acquisition last year, our second substation will be commissioned later this year, and that will provide similar environmental benefit. So a company like us, even though we are sponsored by private equity from China, I found because of we are leading in the sustainability part, and we want to tell our story to the outside world, not only to tell to the Wall Street banks, to the bond holders, to rating agencies. So started this year, we want to tell the general audience that it can be in Houston, can be in Texas. And also we celebrate our success, just like I mentioned. Later this month, we are going to have $7 billion oil and gas sales, and we'll tell the outside world, we pay $2 billion royalty and state local tax. So we contribute to the economy of Texas, and we are sustainable business. I consider not only as the oil and gas company, and also Chinese capital-owned business. We contribute to the economy of Texas and create jobs.
Yeah, that's absolutely impressive. And I know you've won several awards for the sustainable innovations, right? So you now got the reputation for, and your experience in sustainability is actually transferable to other companies. I mean, other industries. I mean, that's absolutely impressive. Thank you. And Amy, so Fuyao is also got the reputation for like excellent localization strategies. Sure. Could you share with us, so with the audience, what have you been done successfully and creatively in terms of like different fields of localization, supply chain management, human resource, anything? Yeah, please.
Sure, thanks for the question, right? I think, localization is definitely very, very important. And I think Fuyao has been doing a really great job for the localization piece. We basically try to source most of our raw materials here in the US. And of course, one of the most important reasons why we're here in this market is because many of our customers, the names I just mentioned, right, they are in the US. US is a huge market. It's very important for us to be close to the clients. So in terms of localization strategy for supply chain, first question we need to think about is, what are the products we really need to buy, we need to source here in the US? So for Fuyao, it's all about the glass, right? Chairman always say that he is only interested in making glass. So for us, it's all about glass. In order to produce the final glass, final products for our customers, we actually need a lot of raw glass as our material. For example, in the Ohio facility alone, we need more than 10 million pieces of raw glass annually. So the mission critical question, for the whole Fuyao team to ask is, where can we get those raw glass in the US? Who is the reliable supplier for this? After we did a lot of due diligence and research, the answer was no, we cannot find it here in the US because we need a huge number of quantities and we have very high requirement for the quality. So it's not easy to just say we found this supplier who can, be a safe and secure supplier for our process. Back in 2014, when the chairman decided to invest heavily and aggressively in the Ohio facility, he also actually decided to invest in Illinois. So the Illinois facility is to make the raw glass as a supplier for the Ohio production. In this way, we actually not only localized our supply chain, we also actually vertically integrated our supply chain within the Fuyao family. So this is a very, reliable, this gives a lot of certainty for our customers that they know we have a reliable supply chain system within the group and that we can always deliver their products on time. Because of this strategy, we are actually, the impact of the COVID-19 supply chain disruption was very limited to Fuyao because we control our own, supply chain process. So this is why I say it is very important to localize your supply chain here. And to the extent you can, of course, you can vertically integrate it. For those who cannot, I think it's very important to find multiple suppliers so you diversify and you de-risk the possibility of one company that or two companies that cannot actually supply to you, or potentially they may increase your price. All those are risk factors that the companies, especially for new Chinese companies coming to the US market, you really need to think through of all the process. So the second part of your question is about the workforce localization. I think, we definitely, for the operations here, we think we are run in the American way. We have about 3,000 workers across 4 different states. More than 90% of our workers are hired locally. So the question is, how do we work together? It is very, very important for everybody, especially workers from China and the US and the, other countries to respect each other, to embrace diversity and work as one team, the one Fuyao team for a common goal, for the same goal is to make company successful and everybody happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, you mentioned about the workforce and how Fuyao cracked the challenges during your operations. That's also one of the major challenges in localization strategies for Chinese companies. And I also want to ask Sean and John about this, like the workforce, the human resource part, and also a lot of Chinese companies are facing challenges from like a cross-border investment and financing that you guys have extensive experience on. So what was your observations on those aspects or layers of localization, and what's your strategies to help your clients to tackle those problems?
Yeah, I think I echo Amy just talk about, I think also Ms. Guan was talk about, I think they're already doing great job on the localization, sustainability, and build your trust and a brand locally. So that's definitely is the best practices share with all the companies here. So I think talking about localization, this is we're always talking about globalization. The key globalization factor is the localization, okay? And so in order to be, I know Fuyao is doing very well, but however, I'm still challenging you, in your C-suite, how many people are really localized. And, you can see company from Japan, from Korea, right? And then they may be C-suite 90% or even more than 95%. They are all local hired and local American. That's really become a true local company. And you really compete with your peer. They will bring you to the locals, the whole entire dynamic. There's a lot of nuances and you have no idea what's really going on. But I think the first stage, all these guys doing very well, but the next steps or second, the third, and there's a still long way to go, right? And I think if you want to see a true global company, and they are doing, you can ask, Ford, you guys, they're talking about auto industry and Chrysler and General Motors, and ask them, their Chinese branch, their Chinese local company, their investment in China, who is the CEO locally, right? And so in order to really successful, it has to be 100% integrated yourself locally, okay? So that's very important. I think talking about talents, right? Talents, I think I just mentioned, you have to really leverage the local talents. All right, and the local talents talking about for all C-suites and the board members, and we're asking you, your board member, do you have a board for your U.S. company, right? Give you a lot of advice locally, and so giving this audience, do we have enough local audience talking about local, right? So I think the talents, it is just mingle together. It's very, very important, mingle together. Actually, today I actually bring to our 上海交大或者是交通大学校友会的校友们在 local. They are all local. Okay, they all work in the local companies. And anyone here and from 校友会的? Zhang Li, okay, yeah. So yeah, I think they can bring in maybe best practices in the local, how are bilingual people here and educated back in China, but now here work 30 years, 20 years in the US. Those people maybe also can add a lot of values, right? Yeah. So I think the important thing is that there's a lot of Chinese company now have to facing in terms of financing, we're talking about import control or export control, right? And we were just talking about supply chain. I'm glad that this local source raw material. There's a Inflation Reduction Act just enact, right? And basically in 2024, 1/1/2024, if your say EV company, an EV car, if your components was manufactured from China, then that 我说整车厂, the company who really assembling all the car together, they're not gonna get incentive or fund the US government anymore. You're not qualified. There's a huge incentive, right? And in 1/1/2025, there's basically, if your raw material was from China, then you're not gonna qualify any incentive, period. So that's a huge, right? So that means you have no choice. You have to be localized, everything, right? So, and then talking about export-import control, there's a tariff of 30% still there. Was expired in June, the 30% tariff, 我们说关税30%的关税, then now extended indefinitely forever. So that's another thing, right? So that's, you can see a lot of investment now detour going to Mexico, going to other country, then coming into the US. So there's a lot, it's a really complex situation you have to dealing with. That's why John and I here, right, try to help. Yeah, by the way, I forgot to introduce our company. For the people who don't know, we are the 45 billion revenue company worldwide, 360,000 people worldwide, and 80,000 people here in the US. We provide audit, tax, consulting, and transaction consulting. Thank you.
I think those are excellent points, but I would add on the localization. So I've been practicing law now for almost 35 years. So I started as a young lawyer working with Japanese companies when they first came to the United States, and they look exactly like the Chinese companies today. And it takes time to truly localize your C-suite. It just does. Look, this is your first investment in the United States. So you're going to send the people from home. But I agree, over time, what you're going to find is that you will make those local hires, and you will get, I think, more local, because I mean, I've seen it. There are some companies that were, almost exclusively C-suites were Japanese, and now there's not a Japanese. I don't think there's a Japanese employee to be found. So I think that will occur over time as you get more comfortable with your investments here in the United States. But with localization, I think it's really important when you begin to set up a new business here to really understand you can't just obviously lift your business from China and just drop it here in the United States. We have different laws, different cultures, different language, different business customs, and the list goes on and on. I see this all the time with US companies going to China, and I know it's the same coming here. We all need to think about how can we help you understand what your business model is, say in China, and how can we help you adapt it to fit in the United States. And that's what we do. I think that's what our companies do. We can really help you do that so you are successful. And then with respect to the human resource issue, I think it's really important to focus on training both the non-US executives, managers, and even staff on US laws, whether it's hiring, firing, discrimination, harassment, I mean, you name it, on those HR laws. I think it's really important to do it. And at the same time, also educate the US staff on things that relate to China. Most people in these small towns and places where you have your companies, I don't think they've probably ever seen someone from China, probably until your company came. And I think they would really like to know more about China. And I think that cross-cultural communication issue, if I see a company in trouble, that's usually where it is, where you have people talking at each other, but not with each other. They don't seem to understand each other. So for example, one company, the staff accountants in the company were just grumbling and complaining that they had to report numbers in a different way. Well, it's because, of course, the Chinese parent company is publicly traded in different accounting standards, but they didn't know that, and they were just like, "Why do we have to do this?" They just thought it was dumb because they didn't understand the purpose. But that one little conversation smoothed it all over, and everybody was friends. So I think it's really important to have training. So we've actually developed HR training. We probably have about 12 different modules all around different HR issues that are all geared towards different, we'll say, companies from different countries, whether it's German, Chinese, because they deal with, we try to compare and contrast. So in China, for example, this is how you can do it, but here, this is how it's done. So you can understand where those differences are. And I think then it's easier then for compliance. And then we also talk about training of different executives and managers on US laws and compliance issues that maybe apply to their specific job function. So for example, if it's a publicly traded company and there's certain reporting all around different maybe SEC rules that apply to your company, or maybe if you're a technology company and around export controls, US export controls, depending on how you do business, maybe it's US economic sanctions, but all these different laws that may apply to your business, I think it's really important to make sure that the folks get the training that they need, because again, it's just different. It's not good or bad. It literally is just different. And unless someone until my colleagues educated me about Chinese law, I was probably as lost as anyone. But it took their patience and their training and just educating me. And it's the same thing, I think, within the companies. But again, I know EY has similar programs where they can work with your company and really help your staff become much more familiar and comfortable with business and business customs and practices here.
I'd like to take this opportunity to share the Surge Energy's experience. I think that when in Rome, do what the Romans do, that's a good practice. But the board of Surge Energy, when they started this company, they take one step further. So that method is find the right Romans, empower them, provide in competitive package, give them flexible working schedule, so let the Romans do the work. So actually the first employee of Surge Energy in 2015 was a local local American. And you go back to the company website before I joined, I was the second CEO, I joined 2018. The first management team, no one speaks Chinese. And if you go to my current, the surgeenergy8.com, my company website, among the 11 people in the leadership team, I'm the only one who can speak Chinese. So this is a kind of unique, yeah. When Romans do what Romans, whether you can hire the Romans to do the work for you. But the most important thing is to find the right people who fits the company culture. Otherwise, I can give two examples. First, shale oil and gas is totally different. It's a very challenging business. That's what we are in. But I give two examples. One is Royal Dutch Shell. That's the biggest European super majors. Enter this shale oil and gas. Didn't work except last year. And if looking at the BHP, the biggest mining company from Australia, they don't have also from Europe, from Australia, they speak the language. And they were in the mining, especially for Royal Dutch Shell, that is oil and gas. But in the shale oil and gas, totally different business. Need to find the right person, right people with the right culture to do the work for the company.
Thank you. And John, thank you for mentioning the cross-cultural communication. I think that speaks to the foundation of all the gaps that we've been facing, right? There definitely has a lot of practical issues, but that stays at the core of the localization strategy. And thank you all for your sharing. I hope we can keep this conversation going, but due to we have limited time, we will skip the Q&A and we will leave the Q&A to the reception areas. And feel free to bring your questions to our speakers. And thank you all, and thank you for your time. Right.